The dust kicked up in thick clouds as Thomas Nolan watched his father shake hands with a man who smelled of whiskey and failure. And when the stranger's eyes lingered too long on Thomas's sister standing by the wagon, something cold settled in the cowboy's gut. It was August of 1876 in Circleville, Utah, and the summer heat had turned the small settlement into an oven surrounded by red rock walls that seemed to trap every degree of warmth. Thomas had ridden into town with a simple purpose: to sell his mare and fine leather saddle so he could buy supplies for the winter months ahead. His ranch, modest as it was, sat 20 miles north where the land opened up into decent grazing territory. At 24 years old, Thomas had built something from nothing after his own father had died 5 years back, leaving him with more debts than cattle. But he had worked hard, saved carefully, and now owned his land free and clear with a small herd that was growing each season. The trading post in Circleville was run by a man named Samuel Garrett, a fair dealer who Thomas had worked with before. But today, Samuel was not alone. A rough-looking man with graying hair and clothes that had seen better months stood beside a young woman who kept her eyes fixed on the floorboards. Thomas noticed her immediately, not because she was beautiful, though she was, but because of the way she held herself, like someone trying to take up as little space as possible in the world. "This here is Theodore Sutton," Samuel said, gesturing to the rough man. "He is looking to make a trade. Says he needs a good horse and saddle. Got himself into some trouble up in Salt Lake and needs to move on quickly." Theodore Sutton nodded, his eyes already assessing the chestnut mare tied outside. "That is a fine-looking animal. Good saddle too from what I can see. I will make you a trade that is more than fair." Thomas crossed his arms. "I am looking for cash money, not trade." "Better than cash," Theodore said, and he reached back to grab the young woman's arm, pulling her forward roughly. She stumbled but caught herself, still not looking up. "My daughter. She is strong, can cook, clean, do whatever needs doing. She is worth more than any horse." The words hit Thomas like a physical blow. He stared at Theodore, then at Samuel, waiting for someone to laugh, to indicate this was some kind of sick joke. But Theodore's expression remained serious, expectant even. "You cannot be serious," Thomas said slowly. "Serious as the grave. She is 19, healthy, knows how to work. She will make some man a decent enough wife. I got debts that will not wait, and I need that horse to get where I am going." Thomas looked at the young woman again. She had honey-colored hair pulled back in a braid, and her dress, though clean, was patched in several places. Her hands were work-worn, and he could see a fading bruise on her wrist where her sleeve had ridden up. She still would not meet anyone's eyes. "No," Thomas said flatly. "I will not trade a horse for a human being. That is slavery, and last I checked, we fought a war over that." "She is my daughter," Theodore said, his voice hardening. "I got the right to see she is settled. This is legal guardianship transfer, nothing more." "Legal guardianship," Thomas repeated, his voice heavy with disgust. "You mean selling your own child?" Samuel cleared his throat uncomfortably. "Now, Thomas, I understand your objection, but technically, a father does have rights regarding his unmarried daughter's situation. If he wants to arrange a marriage or placement, that is within his legal rights, even if the method is unusual." "Unusual," Thomas said. "That is a gentle word for what I would call this." Theodore's face reddened. "You going to stand there and judge me, boy? You do not know what I have been through. Her mother died 3 years back, and I got nothing but bad luck since. The girl is a burden I cannot afford anymore. At least this way she gets a roof over her head and I get what I need to start fresh somewhere else. It is better for both of us." Thomas felt anger rising in his chest, the kind of anger that made men do stupid things. But he also felt something else, a profound sadness for this young woman who stood silent while her father bartered her away like livestock. He looked at her again, willing her to look up, to say something, to protest. But she remained still, her breathing shallow, her hands clasped in front of her. "What is your name?" Thomas asked her directly. She flinched slightly at being addressed. Her lips parted, but no sound came out at first. Then, so quietly he almost missed it, "Theresa. Theresa Sutton." Her voice was hoarse, as though from disuse or perhaps from holding back tears for too long. Thomas took a step closer, and she instinctively stepped back. The movement told him everything he needed to know about her life with Theodore Sutton. "Theresa," Thomas said gently, "do you want this? Do you want to be traded away?" She finally looked up, and her eyes were the color of dark honey, flecked with gold. They were also filled with a resignation that made Thomas's heart ache. "What I want does not matter," she said simply. "It never has." Theodore laughed, a harsh sound. "See, she understands how the world works. Now, do we have a deal or not? I will throw in her bag of belongings. It is not much, but it is hers." Thomas looked at the mare outside, the horse he had raised from a foal, trained carefully, planned to get good money for so he could buy the lumber he needed to expand his barn. He looked at the saddle, hand-tooled leather his father had made years ago, one of the few things he had left from the man. Then he looked at Theresa, at the defeat in her eyes, at the way she held herself like someone who had forgotten she had value. "All right," Thomas said, and Theodore's face broke into a grin. "I will make the trade." Samuel pulled out paper to make the transaction official, though Thomas felt sick watching him write it up. Theodore signed eagerly, and Thomas added his name, feeling like he was participating in something fundamentally wrong. Theodore grabbed the papers, already moving toward the door. "Her bag is in my wagon outside, the brown one," Theodore called over his shoulder. "Good luck with her. She is quiet at least, will not talk your ear off." Then he was gone, moving quickly as though afraid Thomas might change his mind. The sound of hoofbeats followed moments later as Theodore rode off on Thomas's mare, the saddle Thomas's father had made creaking with the unfamiliar weight. Thomas stood in the trading post staring at the door, trying to process what had just happened. "I need to file this properly," Samuel said quietly. "Thomas, if you want to contest it, I can help you." "No," Thomas said. "It is done." He turned to Theresa, who had not moved. "Wait here a moment." He walked outside into the brutal August heat and found Theodore's wagon, a rickety thing that looked ready to fall apart. The brown bag was there, small and worn. Thomas grabbed it, noting how light it was. Everything this woman owned in the world fit in one small bag. The thought made his anger flare again. When he returned inside, Samuel was putting away the paperwork. Theresa stood in the exact same spot, her hands still clasped in front of her. "Come on," Thomas said, his voice coming out rougher than he intended. He saw her flinch again and softened his tone. "Please, let us go outside." She followed him silently, and he led her to where his gelding, a sturdy buckskin named Scout, was tied. Thomas secured her bag to his saddlebags, very aware of her standing a few feet away, waiting for instructions like someone who had been trained not to think for herself. He turned to face her fully. The sun was bright overhead, and she squinted against it, finally giving him a clear view of her face. She was pretty, but more than that, she looked intelligent despite the defeat in her eyes. There was something there, buried deep, that had not been completely crushed by whatever life she had lived with Theodore Sutton. "Theresa," he said, and she looked at him warily. "I need you to listen to me carefully. What just happened in there, that was wrong. It was wrong of your father to offer, wrong of Samuel to facilitate, and wrong of me to participate in, even with good intentions. So here is what is going to happen now." He reached into his vest pocket and pulled out the paper Samuel had drawn up. Theresa's eyes widened as he tore it in half, then in half again, then again until it was nothing but scraps. He let the pieces fall to the dusty ground. "You are not property," Thomas said firmly. "You are not something to be traded for a horse and saddle or anything else. You are a human being with rights and dignity, and I will not be party to treating you as anything less." Theresa stared at the torn paper on the ground, her expression unreadable. Her lips trembled slightly, and Thomas saw her hands begin to shake. "But," she said, her voice still quiet, "he traded me. The papers said so. You own." "I own nothing," Thomas interrupted. "No person can own another person. That paper was not worth the ink it was written with." "Then what?" Theresa asked, and he heard the fear in her voice now. "What happens to me? I have nowhere to go. My father is gone. I have no money, no family, nothing." Thomas had been thinking about this from the moment he had agreed to the trade. "I have a ranch 20 miles north of here. It is small but growing. I could use help with cooking and such, as I have been doing it myself, and I am terrible at it. I can offer you a job, with wages and a place to stay. You would have your own space, your own privacy. You work for me, but you work as an employee, not as property. You can leave whenever you want. You save your wages, and when you have enough, you can go wherever you want, do whatever you want. Does that sound fair?" She stared at him like he was speaking a foreign language. "A job with wages. Yes, I cannot pay much, but it would be honest work for honest pay. You would be free to make your own choices." Tears suddenly spilled down Theresa's cheeks, and she quickly wiped them away with the back of her hand, looking embarrassed. "I am sorry," she said. "I am not usually so emotional. I just did not expect anything like this. I thought I would be going from one prison to another." "Is that what it was? A prison?" She nodded slowly. "After my mother died, my father changed. He drank more, worked less. We moved around a lot, always running from debts. He would get angry, especially when he was drunk. He said I was a burden, that I ate too much, cost too much. He said if I was going to live under his roof, I needed to earn my keep. So I worked, but it was never enough. Then he got into gambling debts in Salt Lake City, and I knew he was planning something. I just did not know what until today." Thomas felt his hands clench into fists. "He had no right to treat you that way. He was my father. He had every right according to the law." "The law is not always right," Thomas said. "Sometimes the law is dead wrong." Theresa wiped her eyes again and took a shaky breath. "Why are you doing this? You do not know me. You just gave up your horse and saddle for nothing." "Not for nothing," Thomas said. "I did it because it was the right thing to do. And I am offering you work because I truly could use the help, and because everyone deserves a chance to build a life on their own terms. You have been dealt a bad hand, but that does not mean the game is over." She studied him for a long moment, and Thomas saw something shift in her expression. A tiny spark of hope, fragile as new flame, flickered to life in her eyes. "All right," she said. "I will take the job. Thank you, Mr. Nolan." "Thomas," he corrected. "If we are going to work together, we should use first names." "Thomas," she repeated, testing the name. "Thank you, Thomas." They rode north out of Circleville with Theresa sitting behind Thomas on Scout, her arms wrapped lightly around his waist to keep her balance. The August heat was oppressive, and the landscape shimmered with heat waves rising from the red rocks. Thomas kept Scout at a steady walk to preserve the horse's strength, and to keep from arriving at the ranch covered in sweat and dust, though that was probably inevitable. At first, they rode in silence. Thomas was very aware of Theresa behind him, of how tense she felt, how carefully she held herself to avoid too much contact. He tried to think of something to say that would put her at ease, but everything that came to mind seemed inadequate or potentially frightening given what she had been through. Finally, he simply started talking about the ranch, figuring that knowledge about where she would be living and working might help. "The ranch is not much to look at yet," he said over his shoulder. "Just a small cabin, a barn, a chicken coop, and some corrals. I have about 30 head of cattle, a milk cow, chickens, and now just scout here for horses since I was planning to use the money from selling the mare to buy lumber for expanding. But that can wait. The land is good though, got a creek running through it that does not dry up even in summer. Plenty of grass for grazing." "It sounds nice," Theresa said softly. "It is home," Thomas said. "I built most of it myself over the last 5 years. My father had this land, but he died before he could do much with it. Left me with debts that took 2 years to pay off. But now it is mine, clear and free, and every year it gets a little better." "You built it yourself, the cabin and barn," "Most of it. Had help with the barn raising from neighbors. That is how it works out here. When someone needs a barn built or a house raised, everyone comes together to help. Then when they need help, you return the favor." "That sounds nice too," Theresa said. "People helping each other." "It is how we survive out here," Thomas said. "The land is hard, the weather is unpredictable, and there are plenty of dangers. But if people stick together, look out for each other, we make it work." They rode on, and Thomas pointed out landmarks as they passed them. A distinctive rock formation that looked like a sleeping giant, a stand of cottonwood trees that marked where a seasonal stream ran, a distant plateau where antelope sometimes grazed. Theresa listened, occasionally asking quiet questions, and Thomas found himself enjoying her company despite the strange circumstances of their meeting. As the afternoon wore on and the heat reached its peak, Thomas stopped by a small spring he knew about. "We should rest Scout and get some water," he said, dismounting and then offering his hand to help Theresa down. She hesitated before taking it, and her hand felt small and calloused in his. They drank from the spring, the water cold and sweet, and Thomas shared some jerky and biscuits he had in his saddlebags. Theresa ate slowly, carefully, like someone who had learned not to take food for granted. "Can I ask you something?" Theresa said after they had been sitting in companionable silence for a few minutes. "Of course." "Why did you really do it? Take the trade, I mean. You could have just walked away, told my father where he could go with his offer. But you did not." "Why?" Thomas considered the question. "When I looked at you, standing there while your father tried to trade you away, I saw something in your eyes. Resignation, yes, but also intelligence. Strength, even if it was buried. You reminded me of a horse I once saw, one that had been beaten and starved by a cruel owner. Someone else bought that horse cheap, treated it with patience and kindness, and it became one of the finest animals I ever saw. Sometimes all it takes is a chance, someone willing to see the value that others missed or tried to destroy. So you saw me as a broken horse to be fixed?" Theresa asked, but there was no anger in her voice, only curiosity. "No," Thomas said firmly. "I saw you as a person who deserved better than what she was getting. I saw someone who had been treated as less than human, and I could not stomach being part of that. So I played along just long enough to get you away from him, and then I made sure you knew the truth. You are not property. You never were." Theresa was quiet for a moment, and when Thomas looked at her, he saw tears sliding silently down her cheeks again. "I do not know how to be anything else," she whispered. "For 3 years I have been told I am worthless, a burden, less than nothing. How do I just stop believing that?" Thomas felt his throat tighten. "One day at a time," he said gently. "You start by making choices for yourself. Small ones at first. What you want to eat, what work you want to do, how you spend your time. You practice having opinions and stating them. You let yourself want things, dream about things. And slowly, you remember who you were before someone tried to convince you that you were not worth anything. And if I cannot remember, if that person is too far gone, then you build someone new, Thomas said. Someone stronger because she survived what would have broken most people. You get to decide who Theresa Sutton is. Not your father, not me, not anyone else. Just you. She wiped her eyes and took a shaky breath. I want to believe that is possible. It is, Thomas said. I promise you it is. They mounted up again and continued north. The landscape gradually shifted, the red rocks giving way to more varied terrain with scattered pines and juniper. The air cooled slightly as they gained elevation, though it was still warm. Thomas pointed out the boundary of his land, marked by a line of stones he had set himself, and Theresa sat up straighter, looking around with interest. "It is beautiful," she said, and Thomas heard genuine wonder in her voice. "Wait until you see it in spring," Thomas said. "Wildflowers everywhere, the creek running high with snowmelt, new calves playing in the pastures. That is when it really shines." As they crested a low hill, the ranch came into view. It was modest, as Thomas had said. The cabin was small but well built, with a solid roof and a stone chimney. The barn was larger, with space for several horses and storage for hay and equipment. Corrals extended from the barn, currently holding the milk cow and a few steers. The chicken coop sat near the cabin, and Thomas could see the birds scratching in their enclosed run. Beyond it all, the creek glinted in the late afternoon sun, lined with green grass and willows. "Home," Thomas said simply. He felt Theresa's grip on his waist tighten slightly. "It is more than I expected," she said. They rode into the yard and Thomas dismounted, then helped Theresa down. Scout, tired from carrying two people in the heat, headed immediately for the water trough, and Thomas let him drink before removing the saddle and bridle. Theresa stood uncertainly in the yard, her small bag at her feet, looking around. "Let me show you the cabin," Thomas said, leading the way. He opened the door, which he never locked since there was no one for miles to worry about, and stepped inside, gesturing for Theresa to follow. The interior was simple but clean. One large room served as kitchen and living space, with a stone fireplace on one wall, a small kitchen area with a stove and table, and a couple of comfortable chairs near the fireplace. A door led to Thomas's bedroom, barely large enough for a bed and a chest of drawers. Another door led to a small room he had been using for storage. "I know it is not much," Thomas said, suddenly seeing his home through her eyes and feeling self-conscious. "But it is sturdy. Keeps the heat out in summer, the cold out in winter." "It is wonderful," Theresa said, and she sounded like she meant it. She moved slowly through the space, her fingers trailing lightly over the table, the back of a chair, the mantel above the fireplace. "It feels like a home." Thomas cleared his throat. "That small room there, the one I have been using for storage, I can clear it out for you. It is not big, but it has a window and enough space for a bed and some belongings. It will take me an hour or so to move things and get it set up, but it will be yours, your private space." Theresa turned to look at him, and her eyes were bright with unshed tears again. "My own room. Yes, with a door that latches from the inside. Your space, your privacy. I will not enter without your permission." She pressed a hand to her mouth, and Thomas saw her shoulders shake. He wanted to comfort her but was not sure how, so he just stood there awkwardly until she composed herself. "I am sorry," she said, lowering her hand. "I keep crying. I am not usually like this." "You have been through a lot today," Thomas said gently. "You are allowed to feel things." She nodded and wiped her eyes. "What can I do to help? With setting up the room, you can tell me what you need. A bed, obviously. I have an extra bed frame in the barn and a mattress that is decent. What else? A chest for clothes, a chair." "That sounds like more than enough," Theresa said. "I do not have many belongings." They worked together through the remainder of the afternoon and into the evening. Thomas moved the stored items out of the small room and into the barn, then swept and scrubbed the space clean. Theresa helped him carry in the bed frame and mattress, a small chest he had in the barn, and a simple chair. Thomas found some fabric he had bought months ago with vague intentions of making curtains, and Theresa, proving surprisingly skilled with a needle, quickly fashioned a simple curtain for the window. As they worked, Thomas noticed Theresa beginning to relax. Her movements became less guarded, and she spoke more freely, offering opinions on where things should go and even laughing once when Thomas nearly dropped the mattress on his foot. It was a small laugh, quickly stifled, but it was there, and it made Thomas feel like he had done the right thing. By the time the sun was setting, the room was ready. Simple but comfortable, with the bed made up with clean sheets and blankets, the chest at the foot of the bed, the chair by the window, and the curtain filtering the evening light. Theresa stood in the doorway, looking at the space with an expression Thomas could not quite read. "Is it all right?" he asked. "It is perfect," she said softly. "Thank you, Thomas. I never expected anything like this." "You are welcome," he said. "Now I should make some dinner. Are you hungry?" "I can make dinner," Theresa said quickly. "That is part of my job, right? Cooking and such." Thomas hesitated. "You have had a long day. I can manage tonight." "Please," Theresa said, and there was something in her voice, a need to be useful, to contribute, to have a purpose. "Let me do this. I want to." Understanding that this was important to her, Thomas nodded. "All right, the kitchen is yours. I need to go check on the animals and do evening chores. I will be back in about an hour." He left her there and went out to tend to the livestock. He fed the chickens, collected eggs, milked the cow, and checked on the cattle in the near pasture. As he worked, he thought about the day's events, about the choice he had made, about the young woman now in his cabin preparing dinner. He had not planned any of this. This morning, he had woken thinking about lumber and winter preparations. Now he had an employee, a woman whose father had tried to trade her away, a person who needed not just a job but a chance to rebuild her entire sense of self. It was a lot of responsibility, and Thomas wondered if he was up to it. But when he returned to the cabin and smelled bread warming and stew cooking, when he saw Theresa moving confidently in the kitchen space, setting the table with the care of someone who took pride in their work, he thought maybe it would be all right. Maybe they would both figure this out together. They sat down to eat, and Thomas took a bite of the stew and nearly groaned with pleasure. "This is delicious," he said honestly. Theresa looked pleased, a faint blush coloring her cheeks. "I used what I found in your pantry. You have a good supply of basics." "I stock up when I go to town," Thomas said, "but I usually just throw things together without much thought. This is actual cooking." They ate in comfortable silence for a while, both hungry from the day's work. When they were finished, Theresa cleared the dishes and began washing them. Thomas moved to help, but she waved him off. "You have done enough today," she said. "Let me finish this." Thomas sat by the fireplace, though it was too warm for a fire, and watched her work. She moved efficiently, her hands sure despite the obvious exhaustion in her posture. When she finished, she dried her hands and turned to him. "I think I will go to bed if that is all right," she said. "I am very tired." "Of course," Thomas said, standing. "Rest well, Theresa. If you need anything in the night, just call out. I am a light sleeper." She nodded and moved toward her room, then paused at the door. "Thomas, thank you again for everything. I know I have said it already, but I mean it. You gave me something today I thought I had lost forever." "What is that?" Thomas asked. "Hope," she said simply. Then she went into her room and closed the door, and Thomas heard the soft sound of the latch sliding into place. He sat for a long time after that, staring at the empty fireplace, thinking about hope and second chances and the strange ways life could turn on a single moment, a single choice. Finally, he went to his own room and lay down, but sleep was slow in coming. He kept thinking about honey-colored eyes filled with resignation, about a father who could trade his daughter away, about torn papers drifting to dusty ground. And he thought about Theresa in the next room, safe behind a door that latched, sleeping in her own space for perhaps the first time in years. That thought, more than anything, let him finally drift off to sleep. The next morning, Thomas woke to the smell of coffee and frying bacon. For a moment, he was disoriented, unable to remember why someone else would be cooking in his kitchen. Then the events of the previous day came rushing back, and he quickly dressed and emerged from his room. Theresa was at the stove, her hair in a neat braid, wearing the same dress from yesterday but looking more rested. She glanced over her shoulder when she heard him. "Good morning," she said. "I hope I did not wake you. I tried to be quiet." "You did not wake me," Thomas said. "I usually get up around dawn anyway. This is a nice surprise." "I could not sleep much past first light," Theresa admitted. "I am used to getting up early, and I thought I should start earning my keep." "You are earning wages, not just your keep," Thomas reminded her gently. "There is a difference," she nodded, turning back to the bacon. "How much? In wages, I mean. We did not discuss an amount." Thomas mentally calculated what he could afford and what would be fair. "How does $20 a month sound, plus room and board, of course?" Theresa's hand stilled on the spatula. $20. Is that not enough? I can go to 25. "No," she said quickly. "I mean, yes, 20 is more than generous. I just did not expect so much." "It is fair pay for fair work," Thomas said. "And once the ranch starts making more money, I can increase it." They ate breakfast together. Then Thomas explained the daily routine. Morning chores included feeding animals, collecting eggs, milking the cow. Then various tasks depending on the day, checking fences, tending the garden, preserving food for winter, maintenance on buildings and equipment. Theresa listened carefully, asking occasional questions that showed she was thinking about how she could help. "I know basic gardening," she said. "And I can preserve food, make jam, that sort of thing. I can also sew and mend clothes. What else do you need?" "Honestly, all of that would be helpful," Thomas said. "I have been neglecting the garden because I am usually too busy with the livestock and land. And my clothes are in sad shape because I am terrible at mending. If you can handle the cooking, the house, the garden, and the chickens, that would free me up to focus on the cattle and horses and the heavier work." "I can do that," Theresa said, and Thomas heard confidence in her voice. This was familiar territory for her, work she knew how to do. They fell into a routine over the following days. Thomas worked outside, riding fence lines, checking on cattle, repairing equipment. Theresa worked around the homestead, cooking, cleaning, tending the garden that had become weedy from neglect, caring for the chickens. They ate meals together, and gradually, Theresa began to talk more, sharing small details about her life before her mother died, before everything fell apart. She had grown up in a small town in Wyoming, she told him. Her mother had been kind, teaching Theresa to read and write, to cook and sew, to see beauty in the world. Her father had been different then too, working hard as a carpenter, coming home tired but content. They had not been wealthy, but they had been happy. Then her mother had died in childbirth, the baby dying with her, and everything changed. Her father blamed himself, blamed God, blamed the world. He started drinking, could not hold jobs, moved them from town to town chasing work that never lasted. Theresa tried to hold things together, but she was just 16 when her mother died, too young to manage a grieving, angry father. "I kept thinking he would get better," she said one evening as they sat outside watching the sunset. That he would wake up one day and be the father I remembered. But he just got worse, and I got older and he started to see me as a burden instead of a daughter. I am sorry, Thomas said. You deserved better. Maybe, Theresa said. Or maybe this is just how life is. People die, things fall apart, and you just have to survive it. It does not have to be that way, Thomas said. Yes, bad things happen. But good things happen too. People can choose to be kind, to help each other, to build instead of destroy. Your father made choices that hurt you, but those were his choices, not some inevitable fate. Theresa looked at him, her expression thoughtful. You really believe that people can choose to be better? I do, Thomas said. I have seen it. I have lived it. When my father died and left me with all that debt, I could have given up, sold the land, walked away. Some people told me I should, but I chose to stay, to work, to build something. It was hard, but it was possible, and now I have this. He gestured at the ranch around them, the land golden in the evening light. It is beautiful, Theresa said softly. You should be proud of what you have built. I am, Thomas admitted, but I am prouder of how I built it. Honestly, with help from neighbors when I needed it, treating people fairly. The land and buildings are just things. The way you do things, that matters more. They sat in comfortable silence as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and purple. Thomas found himself very aware of Theresa beside him, of how she had changed in just a few days. She smiled more easily now, laughed occasionally at things he said. The fear and resignation in her eyes were fading, replaced by something cautiously hopeful. He realized he enjoyed her company. She was intelligent, with observations about things he had never considered. She was hardworking, taking pride in her tasks without needing supervision or direction. And she was kind, gentle with the animals, thoughtful in her interactions with him. Thomas had been alone for 5 years, too focused on building the ranch to think much about companionship or relationships. Now, with Theresa here, he realized how much he had missed having someone to talk to share meals with, to simply exist alongside. It was nice, more than nice, but he was careful not to let his growing appreciation for her company turn into something else. She was here because she had nowhere else to go, because he had offered her a job and safety. The last thing she needed was her employer developing feelings for her and making her feel obligated or pressured. So Thomas kept his thoughts to himself and focused on being a fair employer and, he hoped, a friend. As summer stretched into September, the days remained warm but the nights began to cool. Thomas taught Theresa to ride Scout, needing her to be able to get to town if there was an emergency when he was out with the cattle. She was nervous at first, having rarely ridden, but she learned quickly. Thomas found himself impressed by her courage, the way she pushed through her fear to master the skill. One afternoon, they rode together to check on the cattle in the far pasture. It was a beautiful day, clear and warm with a hint of autumn crispness in the air. The cattle were doing well, fat and healthy, and Thomas felt satisfaction seeing them. This would be a good year. As they rode back, Theresa suddenly pulled her horse up short. "Look," she said, pointing. Thomas followed her gaze and saw a small deer standing in a clearing, watching them with large dark eyes. It was a doe, probably young, still spotted with white. It stared at them for a long moment, then bounded away into the trees. "That was beautiful," Theresa said, her face lit with delight. "There are a lot of deer around here," Thomas said. "Also elk, though they stay higher in the mountains most of the year. And mountain lions, though I have only seen one once. It must be wonderful, living with all this wild beauty around you." "It is," Thomas agreed. "Though it can be dangerous too. That is why it is important to be careful, especially when you are alone. Always carry a rifle if you go far from the cabin and always tell me where you are going." "I will," Theresa promised. That evening, as they ate dinner, Theresa brought up something that had clearly been on her mind. "Thomas, I have been thinking. I have been here a month now, and you have not given me my wages yet." "Oh," Thomas said, feeling foolish. "You are right. I should have brought that up. I was thinking I would pay you at the end of each month. Does that work?" "That is fine," Theresa said, "but I wanted to talk to you about something. Could you keep my wages for me, save them somewhere safe? I do not have anywhere to keep money, and I worry about losing it or having it stolen if I travel to town." "Of course," Thomas said. "I have a strong box where I keep important papers and money. I can add your wages to it and keep track of how much you have saved." "Would you like me to write it down so we both have a record?" "Yes, please," Theresa said. "I want to save as much as I can. I have been thinking about the future, about what I want to do." "Oh." Thomas tried to keep his voice neutral, though he felt an unexpected pang at the thought of her leaving. "What are you thinking?" "I do not know exactly yet," Theresa admitted. "But for the first time in years, I feel like I can think about the future, like I have choices. Maybe I will save enough to start a business, like a bakery or a dress shop, or maybe I will want to buy some land of my own. I just know that I want to have options, to not be dependent on anyone." "That is a good goal," Thomas said, meaning it despite his mixed feelings. "Financial independence gives you freedom. You understand," Theresa said, looking relieved. "I was worried you would think it was wrong of me to want to leave eventually." "Not at all," Thomas said. "I hired you as an employee, not an indentured servant. You are free to work here as long as you want and leave when you want. I hope you will stay for a good while, but I understand if you have other dreams." Theresa smiled, and Thomas thought again how much she had changed. The frightened, defeated woman from August had been replaced by someone who smiled, who laughed, who dreamed about the future. He was proud of the part he had played in that transformation, even as he felt sad about the prospect of her eventually leaving. September passed into October, and the landscape exploded with color as the aspens and cottonwoods turned golden. The work changed with the season, less about growing and more about preparing for winter. They harvested the garden, preserving vegetables and making jam. Thomas cut and stacked wood for the winter, and Theresa helped, hauling armloads to the woodshed near the cabin. They worked together to prepare the barn for winter, ensuring it was tight against the wind and stocked with hay for the animals. As they worked side by side, Thomas found himself increasingly aware of Theresa in ways that had nothing to do with her skills as an employee. He noticed how the autumn sun brought out gold highlights in her hair. He noticed her laugh, which had become more frequent and more free. He noticed the way she bit her lower lip when she was concentrating on a task. He noticed everything, and he tried very hard to pretend he did not. But Theresa noticed things too. She noticed how Thomas was always careful of her comfort, asking if she needed breaks, if she was warm enough, if she had enough to eat. She noticed how he never raised his voice, even when frustrated. She noticed his patience with the animals, his fairness in all his dealings, his quiet strength. And she found herself thinking about him more than she probably should, given that he was her employer. One evening in late October, they were sitting by the fireplace after dinner, a fire crackling warmly against the autumn chill. Thomas was repairing a bridle, and Theresa was mending one of his shirts. It was a comfortable domestic scene, and Theresa felt content in a way she had not felt in years. "Thomas," she said, setting down her sewing, "can I ask you something personal?" He looked up from the bridle. "Of course." "Why have you never married? I mean, you have this nice ranch, you are a good man. I am surprised some woman has not snatched you up." Thomas felt his cheeks warm. I have been too busy building the ranch to think much about marriage, and most of the women around here are already spoken for. The few unmarried ones are either much younger or much older, or we just do not suit each other. So you would want to marry, eventually. I suppose, Thomas said slowly. If I found the right person, someone kind and hardworking, someone who understands ranch life and does not mind the isolation, someone I could talk to, share my life with. He paused, then added quietly, someone like you. The words hung in the air between them. Theresa's eyes widened and Thomas immediately regretted speaking. I am sorry, he said quickly. I should not have said that. You are my employee and I do not want you to feel pressured or uncomfortable. I do not feel pressured, Theresa said softly. I feel surprised and pleased. I have been having similar thoughts about you, but I did not think you would see me that way. Thomas set down the bridle, giving her his full attention. How could I not? You are everything I said, kind, hardworking, intelligent. You have made this house a home in a way it was not before. I enjoy your company more than I have enjoyed anyone's company in years. But I also know you have plans, dreams of independence and starting your own business. I would not want to stand in the way of that. What if my dreams are changing? Theresa asked. What if I am starting to dream of different things? Things that involve staying here, building a life with you. Thomas's heart was pounding. Are you saying that is what you want? I am saying I am thinking about it, Theresa said carefully. I care for you, Thomas, more than I expected to. But I am also scared. I am scared of losing my independence, of becoming property again, even if you would never think of me that way. I am scared of things changing between us and ruining what we have. And I am scared that I am just feeling grateful and confusing that with something deeper. Thomas stood and crossed to sit in the chair next to hers. Those are all reasonable fears, he said. And I do not want to rush you or pressure you, but I want you to know something. If we were to have a future together as partners, as husband and wife, it would be as equals. You would not lose your independence. You would not become property. We would be building something together, making decisions together. And if you are confusing gratitude with deeper feelings, well, I am willing to wait while you figure that out. Theresa looked at him, her eyes shining in the firelight. You are a good man, Thomas Nolan, better than I knew men could be. You deserve someone good, Thomas said. You deserve someone who will treat you with respect and kindness, who will value your opinions and your dreams, who will stand beside you, not in front of you or behind you. And if that someone is me, I will spend every day trying to be worthy of that. Theresa reached out and took his hand, the first time she had initiated physical contact. Her hand was warm, and Thomas felt a jolt at the simple touch. Can we take this slowly? She asked. Can we see where these feelings go without rushing into anything? We can take it as slowly as you need, Thomas said. We have time. They sat there, hands joined, watching the fire, and Thomas felt something shift between them. They had crossed a threshold, acknowledged feelings that had been building for weeks. Where it would lead, he did not know. But for the first time in years, he let himself hope for something beyond just building a successful ranch. He let himself hope for love, for partnership, for a shared future. November brought the first snow, just a light dusting that melted by noon, but a reminder that winter was coming. Thomas and Theresa worked to finish all the preparations, and in the evenings, they sat by the fire and talked. They talked about everything, their childhoods, their dreams, their fears, their hopes. They shared stories and laughter, comfortable silences and gentle touches. Thomas was true to his word about taking things slowly. He did not push for more than Theresa was ready to give. A touch of hands, sitting close by the fire, occasionally his arm around her shoulders on particularly cold evenings. It was sweet and gentle, and Theresa found herself falling for him a little more each day. One evening in late November, as snow fell softly outside, Theresa was preparing dinner when she suddenly stopped and turned to Thomas. "I have decided something," she said. Thomas looked up from the book he had been reading. "What have you decided?" "I do not want to save my wages to leave. I want to invest them in the ranch and our future together." "Our future," Thomas said, hardly daring to hope he understood correctly. Theresa crossed to him, standing in front of his chair. "I love you, Thomas. I have been afraid to say it, afraid to believe it was real, but it is. I love you. I love your kindness, your strength, your patience. I love the life we have built together here. I love coming home to you every evening, sharing meals, working side by side. I do not want to leave. I want to stay as your partner, as your wife if you will have me." Thomas stood, taking both her hands in his. "If I will have you. Theresa, I have been in love with you since that day in Circleville when I saw the strength in you despite everything you had been through. I have been in love with you every day since, watching you bloom, watching you become the person you were always meant to be. Of course I will have you. I want nothing more than to spend my life with you." He cupped her face in his hands, giving her time to pull away if she wanted. But she did not pull away. Instead, she rose on her toes and kissed him, soft and sweet and full of promise. Thomas wrapped his arms around her, holding her close, and felt like every good choice he had ever made had led him to this moment. When they finally pulled apart, both were smiling. "So we are getting married?" Theresa asked. "If that is what you want," Thomas said. "It is what I want," Theresa confirmed, "but I have one condition." "What is that?" "We wait until spring. I want to be married when everything is coming to life, when the wildflowers are blooming and the world is full of hope and new beginnings." "Can we wait until then?" "We can wait until whenever you want," Thomas said. "Spring sounds perfect." They told no one about their plans, keeping the engagement private through the long winter. It was their secret, something warm to hold on to during the cold, dark months. They continued to sleep in separate rooms, Theresa having decided she wanted to wait until they were properly married. Thomas respected that, though there were many evenings when it was hard to say goodnight and go to separate spaces. Winter in Utah could be harsh, and that year was no exception. Snow fell frequently, and temperatures dropped well below freezing. Thomas and Theresa spent long days inside, working on indoor tasks like mending and planning for the spring. They played cards in the evenings, read to each other, and talked endlessly about their future together. "I want children," Theresa said one evening. "Not right away, but eventually." "Is that something you want?" "Yes," Thomas said. "I always thought I would have a family someday. I just did not think it would happen like this." "Like what?" "Like a miracle," Thomas said simply. "Finding you, falling in love with you, building a life together. It feels like something out of a story, not real life." "It is real," Theresa said, squeezing his hand. "And it is ours." They talked about how they would expand the ranch, maybe buy more cattle in the spring, perhaps add a few more horses. Theresa wanted to expand the garden significantly, maybe start selling vegetables and preserves in town for extra income. Thomas wanted to build an addition to the cabin, adding a proper parlor and maybe a second bedroom for when children came. As the days grew longer and the snow began to melt, they made plans for their wedding. It would be simple, just them and a few neighbors, the ceremony performed by the traveling preacher who came through Circleville once a month. Theresa would make her own dress, and Thomas would buy her a ring when he went to town. In early April, with the land just beginning to green up and the first wildflowers appearing, Thomas rode to Circleville. He had several purposes for the trip: to buy supplies, to arrange for the preacher, and to buy a wedding ring. He also wanted to file legal documents ensuring that the ranch was equally in both his and Theresa's names. She would be an equal partner in every way. Samuel at the trading post was surprised but pleased to hear about the upcoming wedding. "I have to say, when I saw you take that trade last August, I wondered what you were thinking. But clearly it worked out for both of you. She is a lucky woman and you are a lucky man." "I am the lucky one," Thomas said firmly. "She is the best thing that ever happened to me." He chose a simple gold band for Theresa, not elaborate but well made and solid. Then he went to the land office to file the papers putting the ranch in both names. The clerk raised his eyebrows. "You sure about this? It is unusual to give a woman equal ownership like this." "I am certain," Thomas said. "We are partners. Partners share equally." The papers were filed and Thomas rode home feeling satisfied. He had done things right, ensuring Theresa would always be secure, always be an equal. When he arrived home, Theresa ran out to meet him, her face glowing with excitement. "I finished my dress," she said. "Do you want to see it?" "I will wait until the wedding," Thomas said, though he wanted to see it immediately. "I want to be surprised. Then I will wear my second-best dress for now," Theresa said, laughing. She helped him unload the supplies, and when he showed her the documents putting the ranch in both their names, she cried. "You did not have to do that," she said. "Yes, I did," Thomas said. "This is ours, not mine. Everything we build from now on is ours." The wedding was planned for the last Saturday in April. The days leading up to it were filled with preparation. Theresa cooked and baked, preparing food for the small gathering. Thomas cleaned the cabin until it sparkled and picked wildflowers to decorate. Their few neighbors were invited, mostly to serve as witnesses and share in the celebration. The morning of the wedding dawned clear and beautiful, the sky an impossible blue, the air soft and sweet with the scent of new grass and blooms. Thomas, dressed in his best clothes such as they were, a clean white shirt and black trousers, his boots polished. He waited outside, pacing nervously, until the preacher arrived with the neighbors. Then Theresa emerged from the cabin and Thomas forgot to breathe. She wore a simple dress she had made from fabric he had bought months ago, white with small blue flowers, fitted at the waist and falling in soft folds to her ankles. Her hair was down, curling softly around her shoulders, with small wildflowers woven through it. She was beautiful, so beautiful that Thomas felt his eyes sting with tears. She walked to him, smiling, her eyes bright with happiness. "Hello," she said softly. "Hello," Thomas managed. "You are beautiful." "You are not so bad yourself," Theresa said, and there was laughter in her voice. The preacher cleared his throat. "Shall we begin?" The ceremony was simple and traditional. They spoke vows to love and honor each other, to stand together through whatever life brought. Thomas slipped the gold band onto Theresa's finger, and she smiled down at it like he had given her the moon. "By the power vested in me by the territory of Utah and the church, I now pronounce you husband and wife. Thomas, you may kiss your bride." Thomas cupped Theresa's face gently and kissed her, soft and tender, a promise and a beginning. When they pulled apart, their neighbors clapped and cheered, and Theresa laughed, her face radiant with joy. They ate the food Theresa had prepared, simple fare but delicious. They laughed and talked with their neighbors, accepting congratulations and good wishes. And when the sun began to sink toward the horizon, painting the sky in brilliant colors, their guests departed, leaving Thomas and Theresa alone. They stood together in the yard, watching the sunset, Thomas's arm around Theresa's waist, her head resting on his shoulder. "Are you happy?" Thomas asked softly. "Happier than I ever thought possible," Theresa said. "When my father traded me away last August, I thought my life was over. I thought I was going to another prison, another place where I had no value. But you gave me something I never expected. You gave me myself back. You gave me choice, dignity, love. You gave me everything. You gave me everything too, Thomas said. A home, not just a house. Purpose beyond just surviving. Love. I cannot imagine my life without you now. Good, Theresa said, tilting her face up to his, because you are stuck with me now. Thomas kissed her again, longer this time, and when they finally went inside, it was together, to a shared room, a shared bed, a shared life. The cabin that had been built for one now held two, and it felt complete in a way it never had before. The first year of marriage was full of adjustments and growth. Thomas and Theresa learned each other's rhythms and habits, how to work together and live together as partners. There were occasional disagreements, times when they had different opinions on how things should be done. But they had made a promise to each other to always talk things through, to respect each other's views, and they kept that promise. The ranch prospered. With Theresa managing the garden and chickens efficiently, Thomas had more time for the cattle and land. They bought 6 more cows in the spring, expanding the herd. The garden flourished under Theresa's care, producing more vegetables than they could use. She began selling the excess in Circleville, along with jams and preserves, bringing in extra income. In the summer, they began building the addition to the cabin. Neighbors came to help, and over the course of several weeks they added a proper parlor and a second bedroom. The house grew, just as their life together was growing. By autumn, Theresa suspected she might be pregnant. She said nothing at first, wanting to be sure, but as the weeks passed and her suspicion became certainty, she told Thomas one evening in late October. He was overjoyed, picking her up and spinning her around despite her laughing protests. "A baby," he kept saying. "We are going to have a baby." "Not for several months yet," Theresa said, but she was smiling. "Probably late spring, if I am calculating right." Thomas immediately became overprotective, wanting Theresa to rest, to not work too hard, to be careful of everything. Theresa found it endearing but also frustrating. "I am pregnant, not ill," she told him. "I can still do normal things." They compromised, Theresa continuing her usual work but accepting Thomas's help with heavier tasks. As winter set in and her belly began to grow, Thomas would catch himself staring at her, marveling at the miracle of new life. He thought often of that day in Circleville, of the choice he had made, of how that choice had led to this moment. He would not change a single thing. Their son was born in May of 1878, arriving on a warm spring morning with minimal fuss. Thomas had ridden to fetch the neighbor woman who served as midwife, and he paced outside the cabin for hours while the women worked inside. When he finally heard the baby's cry, he rushed in to find Theresa exhausted but smiling, holding a small bundle. "A boy," she said. "We have a son." Thomas approached slowly, almost afraid, and looked down at the tiny red face peeking from the blankets. His son. He felt a surge of love so powerful it nearly knocked him over. "He is perfect," Thomas said, his voice thick with emotion. "What should we name him?" They had discussed names for months but never quite settled on one. Now, looking at their son, Theresa said, "What about Samuel? After the man who helped us in his own way that day in Circleville. Without him, we might never have found each other." "Samuel," Thomas said, testing the name. "Samuel Nolan, I like it." Little Samuel was a good baby, healthy and strong. As spring turned to summer, the ranch was filled with new life. Calves gamboled in the pastures, the garden exploded with growth, and Samuel grew and changed daily. Thomas found he loved being a father, loved holding his son, singing to him, watching Theresa care for him with such tenderness and skill. One evening in late summer, they sat outside watching the sunset, Samuel sleeping in Theresa's arms. "Do you remember this time 2 years ago?" Theresa asked softly. I do, Thomas said. We were still getting to know each other. You were still saving your wages, planning to leave. I was such a fool, Theresa said, thinking I needed to leave to be happy. Everything I needed was right here. Not a fool, Thomas corrected gently. You needed to know you had choices, that you were not trapped. You needed to know you were choosing this life freely. There is nothing foolish about that. Theresa shifted Samuel to her shoulder and reached for Thomas's hand with her free one. I choose this. Every day I choose you, our son, this life we have built. I choose all of it. And I choose you, Thomas said. Every day, every moment, I choose you. They sat there as the sun painted the sky in brilliant colors. A small family in the vastness of the Utah landscape, and both felt the deep satisfaction of lives well lived, choices well made, love well earned. The years that followed were good ones. The ranch continued to prosper, growing slowly but steadily. Samuel grew from baby to toddler to young boy, bright and curious and full of energy. Thomas taught him to ride, to care for animals, to work the land. Theresa taught him to read and write, to appreciate beauty, to be kind. When Samuel was 3, a daughter arrived, a tiny thing with Theresa's honey-colored eyes and Thomas's dark hair. They named her Alina, and Samuel was instantly smitten with his baby sister, wanting to help care for her constantly. 2 years after Alina came another son whom they named James. The cabin continued to grow to accommodate the expanding family, rooms added as needed. The ranch grew too, more cattle, more horses, more land purchased as they could afford it. Through it all, Thomas and Theresa remained devoted to each other. They still talked for hours in the evenings after the children were in bed. They still worked side by side, partners in every sense. They still looked at each other with love and wonder, grateful for the life they had built together. Neighbors and visitors often remarked on the obvious affection between them, the way they moved in sync, anticipated each other's needs, shared private smiles and jokes. It was clear to everyone that theirs was a love match, rare and precious. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Thomas gave Theresa a gift he had been working on for months. It was a book, handmade, with their story written in his careful script. It began with that day in Circleville, with a frightened woman being bartered for a horse and saddle, with a cowboy who chose kindness over profit. It told of their courtship, their wedding, the births of their children, the building of their life together. Theresa read it with tears streaming down her face. When she finished, she looked up at Thomas. This is the most beautiful gift anyone has ever given me. It is our story, Thomas said. I wanted to write it down so we would never forget where we started, how far we have come. I could never forget, Theresa said. You saved me, Thomas. You gave me back my life. We saved each other, Thomas said. I was just existing before you. You taught me what living really means. They renewed their vows that day, standing in the same spot where they had married 10 years before. Their children gathered around them. They spoke of love that endures, partnership that strengthens over time, commitment that deepens with each passing year. As the years continued to pass, their children grew and eventually left home to build their own lives. Samuel became a rancher like his father, starting his own spread not far away. Alina married a schoolteacher and moved to Salt Lake City. James became a veterinarian, one of the first in the territory, and settled in Circleville itself, bringing his skills to the community. Thomas and Theresa grew older together, their hair graying, their hands becoming gnarled with age and work, but their love never diminished. If anything, it grew deeper, richer, more precious with each passing year. On a warm June evening in 1910, they sat together on the porch of the expanded cabin, now a proper house with multiple rooms and modern conveniences. They were both in their 50s, still healthy, still working the ranch, though their children helped more now. "You ever regret it?" Theresa asked suddenly. "Trading that horse and saddle for me?" Thomas turned to look at her, this woman he had loved for over 30 years. Her face was lined now, her hair silver, but her eyes were the same honey gold that had captivated him that first day. "Not for a single moment," he said. "That horse and saddle were just things. You are everything. You are my partner, my love, my life." "How could I ever regret the best decision I ever made?" Theresa smiled, the same smile that had first appeared in those early days on the ranch, the smile that meant she was truly happy. "I love you, Thomas Nolan. I have loved you from that moment in Circleville when you tore up those papers and told me I was not property. You gave me my life back, and I have spent every day since trying to be worthy of that gift." "You were always worthy," Thomas said firmly. "You just needed someone to see it, to reflect it back to you, until you could see it yourself." They sat together as the sun set over the land they had built together, the ranch that had started small and grown, just like their family, just like their love. They held hands, comfortable in the silence, grateful for every moment they had shared. Inside the house, the sounds of their grandchildren playing drifted out. Samuel had brought his family for a visit, and the house was full of noise and laughter and life. It was everything Thomas and Theresa had dreamed of all those years ago and more. "We did good," Thomas said softly. "We did," Theresa agreed. "We did very good indeed." As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, they remained there, two people who had found each other in the most unlikely way, who had built a life of love and purpose and meaning. They had faced hardships and celebrated joys. They had raised children and built a legacy. They had loved each other through everything. And that love, born on a dusty August day in Circleville when a cowboy chose kindness over profit, and a frightened woman learned she was more than property, that love endured. It was the foundation of everything they had built, the core of who they were, the greatest treasure of their lives. The children eventually called them in for dinner, and Thomas stood, offering his hand to Theresa just as he had done countless times before. She took it, just as she always had, and they walked inside together, into the warmth and light and love that filled their home. Their story, which had begun with an act of profound kindness, with the rejection of a terrible transaction, with the insistence on human dignity, had become a love story for the ages. It was a story they would tell their grandchildren, who would tell their children, passing down the lesson that people are never property, that kindness matters, that love can bloom in the most unexpected places. Thomas and Theresa Nolan lived long lives, surrounded by family and love. They worked their ranch together until they were physically unable, then handed it over to Samuel while they enjoyed a well-earned rest. They watched their grandchildren grow, met great-grandchildren, and celebrated over 50 years of marriage before Thomas passed peacefully in his sleep at the age of 78. Theresa followed him 6 months later, unable to imagine a life without her partner. She died surrounded by children and grandchildren, her last words a whisper of Thomas's name. They were buried side by side on a hill overlooking the ranch, two simple headstones marking the graves of two people who had loved deeply and well. And if you visit that place even now, more than a century later, you can still feel something special there, the echo of a love that transformed two lives and created a legacy of kindness, dignity, and respect that endured through generations. The ranch still stands, owned now by Thomas and Theresa's great-great-grandchildren, who work the land with the same dedication and care their ancestors did. The story of how it all began is still told, how a woman was bartered for a horse and saddle, how the cowboy gave both back and said she was not property ever, and how that moment of principled defiance became the foundation of a love that lasted a lifetime and beyond. It is a story of hope, of second chances, of the power of human decency. It is a reminder that every choice matters, that kindness can change lives, that love can heal even the deepest wounds. And it is a testament to the truth that the most valuable things in life cannot be bought or sold. They can only be freely given and freely received. Thomas and Theresa's story became legend in Circleville and the surrounding areas, passed down as an example of what love should be, of how people should treat each other, of the kind of legacy worth leaving. And though they are long gone, their love lives on in the family they created, the land they stewarded, and the story that reminds us all that every person has infinite worth, that human dignity is not negotiable, and that true love is built on respect, equality, and the unwavering belief that no one ever is property.